You grind your bones to dust for 24 years to build a mountain of cash for your little girl, only to be told you're just a spectator at her finish line. They expect you to smile, pay the bill, and fade into the background. I didn't. I kept the money. The paper of the bank statement felt heavy in my hands, thick and textured, the kind of stationery that institutions use to make you feel like your money is real. The number printed at the bottom right corner was exact: $200,431.18. I traced the raised ink of the comma with my thumb. It was calloused, the skin permanently thickened from 30 years of gripping pipe wrenches, pulling wire, and muscling drywall into place before I finally got my own contracting firm off the ground. That comma represented 1,000 missed dinners. The 400 represented weekends I spent inhaling fiberglass dust instead of watching Saturday morning cartoons. I started the account the week Lauren was born. I remember the exact smell of the bank lobby that day, a sterile mix of lemon floor wax and stale air conditioning. I deposited $50. Over the years, that 50 became 500, then 5,000. Every time I took a side job, every time I worked a holiday for time and a half, a chunk of it went into this account. It was the Lauren Fund. College, emergencies, and eventually, a wedding. She only used a fraction for college. She got a partial scholarship, and my ex-wife Brenda chipped in. So the fund just sat there, compounding, swelling into a small fortune, a $200,000 safety net, a father's concrete proof of love, stored in cold hard digits because I didn't know how to say it out loud. Brenda and I divorced when Lauren was 12. It wasn't an explosive, plate-throwing split. It was the quiet, suffocating death of a marriage, where two people realize they are roommates who occasionally argue about the electric bill. I left. I moved into a 2-bedroom apartment that smelled persistently of boiled cabbage from the hallway, and Brenda kept the house. I kept working. I had alimony, child support, and the Lauren Fund to feed. 2 years later, Greg moved in. Greg was a high school guidance counselor. He wore fleece vests and had soft hands. He had the kind of calm, modulated voice that made me want to punch a hole through a door. Greg was home at 4 p.m. every day. He didn't work summers. Greg had the luxury of time. While I was out in the freezing sleet coordinating concrete pours, Greg was sitting at my old kitchen table, helping Lauren with her algebra homework. While I was pulling a triple shift to cover the rising property taxes on a house I no longer lived in, Greg was driving Lauren to soccer practice in the minivan I bought. Greg was there for the tears over boyfriends, the prom dress fittings, the mundane Tuesday night dinners. I was the ATM. I accepted it. I told myself it was the sacrifice a man makes. You provide. You build the foundation so they can dance on the floor. When Lauren got engaged to Ian, a decent kid who worked in logistics and drove a sensible sedan, she came to my office. She sat in the vinyl chair across from my desk, spinning her new diamond ring. She smelled like vanilla and expensive dry shampoo. "Dad, weddings are crazy expensive now," she had said, her voice tight with an anxiety I wanted to instantly crush. I had leaned back, the leather of my chair squeaking, and slid a printed sheet of paper across the desk. It was the account balance. I watched her eyes track the numbers. I watched her jaw drop. "The budget is $200,000, I told her. "Whatever you don't spend on the wedding, you and Ian keep for a down payment on a house." She cried. She came around the desk and hugged me, burying her face in my shoulder. "You're the best dad in the world," she mumbled against my flannel shirt. For 6 months, I rode that high. I let her set up a joint checking account where I'd funnel money from the main fund for her deposits. The florist, the band, the ridiculous $15,000 deposit for a historic botanical garden venue that required imported orchids. I signed the checks. I didn't care. It was my money, doing exactly what I bled for it to do. Then came the dinner. We met at a mid-tier steakhouse downtown called the Brass Pelican. It was a Tuesday. The restaurant smelled of charred fat, rosemary, and the faint metallic tang of spilled draft beer. The lighting was low, the kind that makes everyone look a little tired. I arrived first, ordering a bourbon neat. The ice clinked against the glass, a sharp, hollow sound. 10 minutes later, The entourage arrived. Lauren, Ian, Brenda, and Greg. Greg offered his hand as he slid into the booth opposite me. His grip was firm but smooth, like a politician's. Harrison, good to see you, man, he said, giving me that irritatingly empathetic smile he always wore, like he was constantly assessing my mental health. Greg, I grunted, taking a sip of the bourbon. It burned a slow, warm trail down my throat. Dinner was fine at first. We talked about the weather, Ian's promotion at the logistics firm, and the ridiculous cost of prime rib. I paid for the appetizers. I paid for the rounds of drinks, but there was a tension vibrating under the table. Lauren kept glancing at Brenda. Brenda kept looking down at her napkin, meticulously folding it into a tiny square. Ian was entirely focused on his mashed potatoes, looking like a man who desperately wished he were anywhere else. When the plates were cleared and the waiter brought over a round of coffees I hadn't ordered, Lauren cleared her throat. "Dad," she started. Her voice had that slight tremor it got when she was about to ask for an extension on her curfew back in high school. "We need to talk about the ceremony." "Sure," I said, leaning back, crossing my arms. "Did the venue change their minds about the sparklers?" "No, it's not the venue." She looked at Greg, a split-second glance, but I caught it. Greg gave her a microscopic nod of encouragement. My stomach tightened. The steak I just ate felt like a brick of lead. "It's about the walk down the aisle," she said softly. I didn't say anything. I just stared at her. "Dad, I love you, and I am so, so incredibly grateful for everything you've done, for the wedding, for everything." She swallowed hard. "But Greg has been in my life since I was 14. He's been my emotional rock. When I was struggling, he was the one sitting up with me at 2 in the morning. He taught me how to drive. He was just there, day in and day out." The silence in the booth was absolute. I could hear the hum of the refrigerator compressor behind the bar. I could smell the bitter acidity of the black coffee sitting in front of me. "I see," I said. My voice didn't sound like my own. It sounded flat, dead. "I want Greg to walk me down the aisle, Dad," she finally blurted out, tears welling in her eyes. "I want him to give me away. It just feels right. It honors the role he's played in my life." Brenda finally looked up. "Harrison, try to understand. It's not a slight against you. You're her father. But Greg did the heavy lifting during those difficult teenage years." The heavy lifting. I looked at my hands resting on the table. Scars lined my knuckles. A pale slice across my thumb from a rogue utility knife in 08. The slight warp in my index finger from a fracture I never had time to get set properly. The heavy lifting. I didn't flip the table. I didn't scream. I am 54 years old, not a child throwing a tantrum. But inside, something snapped. It wasn't a loud, dramatic break. It was a quiet, clean severing of a cord. I looked at Lauren, my little girl, the one I missed seeing in the school play because I was knee-deep in freezing mud, fixing a ruptured main line so we wouldn't lose the house. She was looking at me with big, pleading eyes, asking for permission to humiliate me in front of 200 people on my own dime. "What role do I play, exactly?" I asked, my tone conversational. "You're the father of the bride," Lauren said quickly, leaning forward. "You'll be in the front row. We'll still do the father-daughter dance, I promise. We're going to pick out a really special song." "The front row," I repeated. "It's a modern wedding, Harrison," Greg chimed in, his voice dripping with awful, soothing reason. "Families are blended now. There's enough love to go around." I turned my gaze to Greg. "Shut your mouth, Greg." I didn't raise my voice, but the words hit the table like a dropped hammer. Greg blinked, leaning back slightly. Brenda bristled. "Harrison, there's no need to be aggressive," Brenda snapped. "I'm not aggressive," I said, reaching into my back pocket for my wallet. I pulled out $300 bills and dropped them on the table to cover the check I knew was coming. "I'm just leaving." "Dad, please don't be mad," Lauren pleaded, reaching across the table to grab my hand. Her touch felt electric, but not in a good way. It felt like a burn. I gently pulled my hand away. "I'm not mad, Lauren," I said. And it was the truth. The anger hadn't hit yet. Right now, I just felt a profound, hollow exhaustion. It's your wedding. You should have the man who raised you walk you down the aisle. You have a good night. I slid out of the booth. I didn't look back as I walked out of the restaurant. The night air was sharp and cold, smelling of exhaust and impending rain. I got into my truck, a 10-year-old Ford with a cracked dashboard. I gripped the steering wheel. It was sticky with years of sweat and dirt. I sat there in the dark parking lot for 20 minutes, listening to the ticking of the cooling engine. I wasn't the emotional rock. I was the foundation. And nobody looks at the foundation when they're admiring the house. They just expect it to hold the weight. I started the engine and drove home. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my recliner in the dark, watching the streetlights cast long, distorted shadows across the living room wall. My house was quiet. Too quiet. It always was. I ran the conversation over and over in my head. Greg did the heavy lifting. By 6 a.m., the hollow exhaustion had finally curdled into a cold, dense anger. It tasted like old pennies in the back of my mouth. I pulled out my laptop and logged into the bank. The joint checking account I had set up for Lauren's wedding expenses had a balance of about $12,000, money I had transferred over just last week for the caterer's second installment and the photographer. The main Lauren fund, the one only my name was on, sat proudly at $143,211.18. They had already burned through nearly 60 grand, $60,000 of my life, traded for imported orchids, custom letterpress invitations, and a down payment on a designer dress. I looked at the numbers until they blurred. I asked myself a question, the kind of ugly, selfish question fathers aren't supposed to ask. Why am I paying for a party I'm not invited to participate in? If Greg was her father in every way that mattered, then Greg could pay for the damn party. Or maybe Brenda, who lived in the house I paid off. At 8:45 a.m., I was parked outside the First National Bank. The air was damp, smelling of wet asphalt and earthworms from the morning drizzle. I walked through the heavy double doors exactly as they unlocked them. The teller, a pleasant woman named Mrs. Gable, who had worked there since Lauren was in middle school, smiled warmly at me. "Morning, Harrison. What can we do for you today?" I slid my driver's license and the debit card for the joint account under the glass partition. "I need to close this checking account, and I need to transfer the entire balance of my savings account into my primary business checking." Mrs. Gable's smile faltered slightly. She tapped at her keyboard, the plastic keys clacking loudly in the empty lobby. "The joint wedding account? Harrison, there are pending transactions on this. If you close it, any outstanding checks or auto drafts will bounce." "I understand," I said. "Close it." She looked at me, her brow furrowed with polite concern. "Are you sure? It's Lauren's big day coming up. Everything okay?" "Everything is fine," I lied smoothly, staring at the marble countertop. "Change of plans. It took 20 minutes. 20 minutes to undo decades of saving." She handed me a cashier's check for the $12,000 from the joint account and a receipt showing the $143,000 had been swallowed by my business account. The paper felt thin. I walked out of the bank feeling a strange, terrifying lightness. The tether was cut. I had stepped off the reservation. I was officially the villain of the story, and the terrifying part was that I didn't care. I drove to my office, poured a cup of the terrible burnt coffee my foreman always made, and waited. It didn't take long. At 11:15 a.m., my phone buzzed on the desk. It was Ian. I let it ring. 2 minutes later, a text popped up. "Ian, hey Harrison, sorry to bother you. The caterer just called in a panic. The card on file for the $8,000 deposit declined. Is there a block on the account?" I picked up the phone. My thumbs hovered over the screen. I could have ignored it. I could have made up an excuse about bank fraud. But I was done being a spectator in my own life. I typed back, "I closed the account. You'll need to ask Greg to cover the catering. He is the father of the bride." After all, I hit send. I put the phone face down on the desk. The silence in the office felt different now. It didn't feel lonely. It felt like a fortress. 10 minutes passed. I could hear the rumble of the cement mixers out in the yard, the shouting of the crew. It was the sound of my life, the life I built. Then, the phone started to ring. Not a text. A call. It was Lauren. I stared at her smiling contact photo, a picture from her college graduation, paid for in full by me. The phone vibrated violently against the wood, dancing toward the edge of the desk. I watched it move. I picked it up and answered. Hello? Dad. What the hell is going on? Her voice was shrill, panicked, completely devoid of the soft, measured tone from the restaurant. Ian just told me what you texted him. The caterer is threatening to cancel our date. Did you freeze the account? I didn't freeze it, Lauren. I closed it. My voice was calm. It scared me a little, how calm I was. You closed it? Why? How are we supposed to pay for the food? The final dress fitting is tomorrow. She was breathing heavily, the panic escalating into hyperventilation. I assume Greg is handling it, I said, leaning back in my squeaky leather chair. Greg? Greg doesn't have that kind of money. He's a school counselor, Dad. You know that. I know, I said. But he did the heavy lifting, Lauren. He's your emotional rock. I'm sure he'll find a way to support you through this difficult time. Are you doing this because of the aisle thing? She shrieked. Are you seriously punishing me because I want my stepdad to walk with me? You're ruining my wedding over your bruised ego. It's not an ego thing, sweetie, I said, looking out the window at the gray sky. It's an investment thing. I was funding a wedding for my daughter, but you made it very clear last night that I'm just a guest sitting in the front row. Guests don't pay for the open bar. Guests bring a toaster. You promised me that money, she sobbed, the sound loud and jagged in my ear. It's my wedding fund. It was my money, Lauren, earned with my hands, my time, and my sweat. I gave it to you out of love. You told me last night you value Greg's time more than mine. That's your choice. But you don't get to reject me as a father and keep me as a bank. You're a monster, she whispered. My mom was right about you. You only care about money. The word stung, a sharp, venomous bite directly to the chest. But I didn't flinch. I just closed my eyes. If I only cared about money, I wouldn't have handed over 60 grand to pay for flowers that are going to die in 3 days. Tell Greg good luck with the caterer. I hung up. I didn't block her number. I just put the phone on silent. I sat in the chair, my heart pounding a heavy, slow rhythm against my ribs. I felt sick to my stomach. I felt a crushing, immense wave of grief. But beneath the grief, buried deep down, where the calluses and the scars lived, I felt right. I opened my laptop and started looking at real estate listings for small cabins up north. If I wasn't paying for a wedding, I was finally going to buy that piece of land by the lake I'd been dreaming about since I was 30. The war had just started, and I knew Brenda was about to launch a tactical strike. Brenda's white SUV pulled into the gravel lot of my contracting yard, exactly 2 hours and 14 minutes after I hung up on Lauren. I watched through the blinds of my office window. The tires crunched loudly against the crushed limestone, sending up small plumes of gray dust that settled over the rusted wheelbarrows and stacks of PVC piping. She parked diagonally, taking up 2 spaces, the engine cutting off with a sharp, aggressive finality. When she stepped out, she looked exactly as she always did when preparing for war, immaculate. She wore a tailored beige trench coat, her hair blown out into a stiff, impenetrable helmet of blonde. She sidestepped a puddle of muddy water near the front door, her heels clicking sharply against the concrete steps. The sound was a metronome ticking down to an explosion. I didn't get up. I stayed in my squeaky leather chair, my hands resting flat on the battered oak desk. The office smelled of stale Folgers, wet drywall mud from the crew's boots, and the faint, metallic scent of the space heater ticking in the corner. The door didn't just open. It flew inward, bouncing off the rubber wall stop with a violent thud. Have you lost your goddamn mind, Harrison? Brenda demanded. She didn't close the door behind her. She stood in the frame, vibrating with a self-righteous fury that I hadn't seen since the day we signed the divorce papers. "Close the door, Brenda," I said. My voice was a low rumble. "You're letting out the heat." She stepped inside and slammed it shut, the frosted glass rattling in its wooden pane. She marched over to my desk and planted both hands on the edge, leaning in. I could smell her perfume, something floral, expensive, and suffocatingly sweet. It instantly brought back a rush of terrible memories, of silent car rides and dinners chewed in absolute, punishing silence. "You reinstate that account right now," she hissed, her eyes wide and dark. "You do not get to ruin our daughter's wedding just because you're throwing a tantrum over a walk down the aisle." "It's not a tantrum," I replied, leaning back, creating physical distance between her perfume and my lungs. "It's a financial restructuring. I am no longer an investor in this particular project." "A project?" She laughed, a harsh, jagged sound that scraped against the walls of the small office. "She is your daughter, Harrison. She is a human being, not one of your strip mall renovations. She is devastated. She's at home hyperventilating because the caterer is demanding their $8,000 and the florist is threatening to pull the centerpieces." "Then I suggest Greg gets a second job," I said flatly. "Or maybe he can dip into his retirement. He's the father of the bride. He should step up." Brenda's face flushed, a deep mottled red creeping up her neck. "This is exactly why she didn't want to walk with you. This right here. You are cold. You are transactional. You think a checkbook makes you a father? Greg was there for the tears, Harrison. Greg was there for the heartbreaks." "And where was I asked, dropping the calm facade for just a fraction of a second. I leaned forward, my forearms resting on the desk. Where was I, Brenda? Was I at a golf course? Was I backpacking through Europe? No. I was out on Highway 9 inches freezing rain, laying pipe so you could keep the house with the wraparound porch. I was breathing in asbestos in cheap flip houses so Lauren could go to the private school you insisted she needed. I was paying for the life you and Greg got to enjoy in your abundant free time. She blinked, momentarily thrown off balance by the venom in my voice. But Brenda was a veteran of these arguments. She quickly recalibrated. "Nobody asked you to be a martyr," she snapped, standing up straight and crossing her arms. "We asked you to be present. You asked for the mortgage to be paid," I corrected her, pointing a calloused finger at her. "You asked for the tuition. You asked for the car insurance, the dental bills, the summer camps, and I paid them. Every single one, on time. For 24 years, my worth to this family has been measured entirely by the numbers printed on my bank statements. And the minute I asked for 1 ounce of respect, one traditional, symbolic gesture of respect at her wedding, I was told to sit in the front row and watch another man take the credit. The silence in the office was suffocating. Outside, I could hear the backup beep of a forklift, a rhythmic, annoying screech that felt completely detached from the reality inside this room. "She loves you, Harrison," Brenda said, her voice dropping a register, attempting a new tactic. "Pity. She really does. But you have to admit, you weren't the one she went to for emotional support." "I know," I said, the fight suddenly draining out of me, leaving nothing but that familiar, hollow exhaustion. "I accept that. I'm not the emotional rock. I'm just the ATM. But the ATM is out of order, Brenda. You can't tell me I'm not a real father to her, and then demand I play the role of the rich patriarch. You guys wanted a modern, blended family where Greg gets the honors. Fine. You've got it. But you get his bank account, too. You're going to regret this," she whispered, her eyes narrowing into cold slits. "When you're sitting alone in your house, and she's walking down the aisle, you are going to realize you threw away your only child over your own fragile pride." "My pride isn't fragile," I said softly, looking down at the worn wood of my desk. "It's just the only thing I have left." Brenda didn't say another word. She turned on her heel, wrenched the door open, and marched back out into the gravel yard. I watched her get into her SUV, the brake lights flaring bright red before she sped out onto the main road, leaving a cloud of dust that drifted slowly toward my window. The fallout over the next 2 weeks was brutal. It was a masterclass in psychological warfare, coordinated entirely by Brenda. My phone became a toxic object. I received a barrage of text messages and voicemails from people I hadn't spoken to in years. My sister, Diane, called me on a Thursday evening while I was eating a microwave dinner over my kitchen sink. The plastic film of the tray was still hot, burning my fingertips. "Harry, what are you doing?" Diane's voice crackled through the phone. She sounded tired, disappointed. "Lauren is a wreck." Brenda called me crying. "You can't do this to her. It's her wedding." "Did Brenda tell you why I did it?" I asked, chewing a piece of rubbery chicken. It tasted like salt and preservatives. "She said you got offended because she wanted Greg to do a joint walk down the aisle with you," Diane replied. I stopped chewing. "A joint walk? Is that what she told you?" I let out a dry, humorless chuckle. "No, Diane. There was no joint walk offered. I was told to sit in the front row while Greg gave her away. Period." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. The static hummed. "Oh," Diane finally said. That changes things a little. But still, Harry, pulling the money, it's nuclear. You're forcing them to cancel the botanical garden. They're going to lose all their deposits. They might have to do it in a public park." "Then they'll do it in a park," I said, tossing the plastic fork into the sink. It hit the porcelain with a sharp clatter. "A marriage isn't about imported orchids, Diane. It's about a commitment. If she and Ian want to be married, they can do it at the courthouse for $50. If they just wanted a $200,000 party to show off to Greg's friends, then I guess they're out of luck." "You're being incredibly stubborn," Diane sighed. "You're going to lose her forever." "I lost her when she was 14, Diane," I said, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. "I just didn't get the memo until Tuesday night." I hung up. I didn't answer the phone again for a month. I spent my evenings immersed in paperwork, not contracts or invoices, but land deeds. I found a property, 4 hours north, nestled in the dense, silent pines of the Upper Peninsula. It was 20 acres of raw, uncut timber surrounding a small deep-water lake. Sitting right on the water's edge was a 2-bedroom log cabin. It had a wood-burning stove, a wraparound deck made of rough-hewn cedar, and absolutely zero cellular reception. I bought it in cash. The transfer of funds from my business account to the escrow company felt like an exorcism. I watched the numbers leave my screen, and for the first time in 24 years, the ledger in my mind went completely blank. I didn't owe anyone anything. The day of the wedding arrived with a mocking brilliance. It was a Saturday in early October, the kind of day where the sky is a painful, piercing blue, and the air smells crisp, like drying leaves and wood smoke. I wasn't in the city. I was 300 miles away, standing on the deck of my new cabin, holding a mug of black coffee. The steam rose in swirling lazy patterns against the chill of the morning air. Through the grapevine of my foreman, Stan, who had a wife addicted to social media, I heard the botanical garden wedding had been entirely scrapped. The deposits were lost. Greg, true to form, hadn't miraculously produced a hidden fortune. They had scrambled, downsized, and moved the venue to a modest banquet hall attached to a golf course in the suburbs. The imported orchids were replaced with seasonal wildflowers. The 15-piece brass band was swapped for a DJ. I didn't care about the details. I only cared about the silence. The silence up here was absolute. It wasn't the lonely, suffocating quiet of my empty apartment in the city. It was a living, breathing silence. I could hear the wind rustling through the tops of the white pines, a sound like a distant ocean rushing over pebbles. I could hear the occasional sharp splash of a trout breaking the surface of the lake, leaving concentric ripples that caught the morning sun. I set my coffee mug on the cedar railing. The wood was rough, snagging slightly on my calluses. I walked down the wooden stairs to the yard, grabbing the heavy splitting maul resting against the chopping block. I had ordered 2 cords of oak to be delivered the week prior. It was sitting in a massive, chaotic pile near the shed. I needed to split it and stack it before the heavy snows hit. It was mindless, grueling, physical labor, exactly what I needed. I set a thick, knotted round of oak onto the block. I squared my stance, feeling the familiar, grounding connection of my boots against the dirt. I gripped the fiberglass handle of the maul, the texture rough and reassuring. I raised it high above my head, feeling the pull in my shoulders, the stretch of muscles that had spent a lifetime building things for other people. I brought the maul down with a sharp exhale. The heavy steel head bit into the wood with a loud, satisfying crack. The oak split perfectly in two, the halves tumbling into the dirt, exposing the raw, bright wood inside. The smell of fresh-cut oak filled the air, sharp, tannic, and entirely real. I set up another piece, and another. For hours, I worked. I didn't think about the banquet hall. I didn't think about Brenda's smug, victorious smile as she watched Greg walk down the aisle. I didn't think about Lauren and her white dress. Every time a stray thought tried to infiltrate my mind, I swung the maul harder. I drove the steel through the wood, burying the memories in the dirt alongside the sawdust. By noon, my shirt was soaked with sweat, clinging uncomfortably to my back despite the crisp air. My hands ached, a deep, throbbing soreness radiating from my knuckles to my forearms. I had a blister forming on the web of my thumb, stinging sharply every time I gripped the handle. It felt wonderful. It was pain I chose, pain with a purpose. I took a break, sitting on the chopping block, drinking water from a plastic jug. The water was ice cold, shocking my system, washing away the metallic taste of adrenaline. I looked at the massive stack of firewood I had built against the side of the cabin. It was neat, perfectly aligned, ready to provide heat through the long, dark winter. A foundation of my own making, for my own warmth. I pulled my phone out of my pocket. No service, just a small SOS icon in the top corner of the screen. I scrolled through my photo gallery until I found a picture from 5 years ago. It was Lauren's high school graduation. She was standing next to me, wearing a blue cap and gown, holding her diploma. I was wearing a suit that didn't quite fit right, looking stiff and uncomfortable. We were smiling, but there was a visible distance between us even then. Our shoulders weren't touching. We looked like two strangers politely sharing a frame. I stared at the screen until it went black, reflecting my own tired, lined face back at me in the glass. I didn't feel victorious. There was no triumphant fanfare playing in my head. I didn't feel like a hero who had successfully defended his honor. I felt like a casualty of a war I never wanted to fight. I loved my daughter. I always would. The grief of losing her, of realizing I was never truly hers to begin with, was a heavy, leaden weight sitting at the bottom of my stomach. It wouldn't disappear today, and it probably wouldn't disappear tomorrow. It was a phantom limb, an ache for something that used to be attached but had to be amputated to save the rest of the body. But beneath the grief, layered beneath the anger and the deep, persistent sorrow, there was something else, a quiet, terrifying peace. I stood up, wiping the sweat from my forehead with the back of my forearm. The air was getting cooler, the sun beginning its slow, angled descent behind the tree line, casting long, dark shadows across the lake. The water turned from a bright, reflective blue to a deep, inky black. I walked over to the woodpile, running my hand along the rough bark of the stacked oak. It was solid. It was real. I had spent my entire adult life pouring my energy, my time, and my sweat into a vessel that had a hole in the bottom. I had convinced myself that if I just poured faster, if I just worked harder, eventually it would fill up. Eventually, I would be recognized. Eventually, I would be enough. But you cannot buy respect, and you cannot rent love. I turned back to the block, picked up the maul, and set another piece of oak in place. The wind picked up, howling softly through the pines, carrying the scent of impending winter. I raised the steel high above my head, taking a deep breath of the freezing air, and brought it down. The wood shattered, clean, and final. I was entirely alone, standing in the sawdust of my own making, and for the first time in a very long time, I was perfectly fine with that. You just listened to a story about the hard choices we make when love becomes a transaction. Family dynamics are rarely simple, and sometimes setting a boundary means becoming the villain in someone else's narrative. If this story resonated with you today, hit that like button. Share it with friends who need to hear it, and subscribe to the channel for more raw, unfiltered stories about the messy reality of life. Drop a comment below with your thoughts right now.